Fresh out of college, I found myself back in the house I had spent my entire childhood in, a place I had promised myself I would never return to. I was 22, armed with a business degree, and ready to take on the world. At least, that's what I had thought. The job hunt had been mercifully short, and within a week, I landed a position at Pearson and Company. Marketing. The pay was decent, and with performance bonuses on the table, I figured I'd be able to save up quickly. That night at dinner, as I sat across from my parents at our worn-out dining table, I shared my good news. "So, I've been thinking," I said, pushing a piece of mashed potato around my plate. "I'll stay here for about 3 months, save up some money, and then find my own place." For a moment, the only sound was the clinking of silverware against plates. My mom and dad exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations they always had, the kind that never meant anything good. Moving out. Mom set down her fork carefully, as if she needed to brace herself. "Honey, you know my hours at the library have been cut back. My back problems make it impossible to work full-time anymore." Dad cleared his throat. "And things at the plant aren't looking good either. They've been talking about layoffs. We're trying to make ends meet," but his voice trailed off. I felt my stomach drop. "We could really use your help," Mom added softly. "You wouldn't have to pay rent here. It just makes more sense, doesn't it?" I stared at my half-eaten dinner, suddenly feeling trapped. They had a point, sort of. It wasn't like I could just ignore them struggling. And they were my parents, after all. "I guess I could stay a little longer," I murmured. Mom's face lit up instantly, and Dad let out a small sigh of relief. "Good," Mom said, reaching for the gravy boat. "Now, tell me more about this job of yours." And just like that, the decision had been made for me. The weekend Sarah arrived with her husband Mike and their 2 kids, Emma and Lucas. Everything in the house shifted. It was like someone had flipped a switch, and suddenly, my parents were unrecognizable, lighter, happier, more animated. "Oh, my precious angels." Mom cooed as she scooped up 4-year-old Emma, spinning her around while Dad swung Lucas onto his shoulders. "You're both getting so big." "Oh, we've missed you." I stood by the kitchen doorway, watching as my parents doted on Sarah's perfect little family, their attention completely consumed. "Sarah, sweetheart, you look wonderful," Dad beamed, his voice filled with warmth. "How's everything going? Tell us all about it." And just like that, dinner became all about Sarah. They asked about her new garden, about what new words Lucas had learned, about how her book club was going. They hung on to every detail as if each word she spoke was gold. Not once did they ask about my job. Not once did they ask how I was doing. As I refilled their coffee cups and cleared away plates, I felt something bubbling inside me. I had felt it before, but I had never allowed myself to really acknowledge it. Resentment. Because this wasn't new. It had always been this way. I could still remember sitting at this very kitchen table when I was 11, holding up my straight-A report card, my heart swelling with pride. "That's nice, honey," Mom had said absent-mindedly, barely glancing at the paper before turning back to Sarah. "So, Sarah, which universities are your top choices?" Sarah, 7 years older, had always been the star of the show. The golden child. The one they invested everything into. Every dinner conversation back then revolved around her grades, her extracurriculars, her college applications. I sat there quietly, pushing peas around my plate, listening as they talked about her AP classes and college tours. And then, the night she got accepted into university. Mom had wept with pride. "We'll make it work, won't we, Robert?" she had said to Dad, her voice thick with emotion. Dad had nodded. "We'll take out a student loan. Our Sarah deserves the best education possible." A week after Sarah left for college, they sat me down with a very different kind of talk. "Anna," Dad had said, his voice serious, "we need to tighten our belts. The loan payments and Sarah's college expenses are significant." And just like that, everything changed. While my classmates got new phones every year, I held onto my old flip phone until it literally fell apart. New clothes? Thrift stores instead of the mall. Christmas presents? Practical things like socks and notebooks. But they never forgot to send Sarah money. "Your sister needs to focus on her studies," Mom would say as she wrote another check. We can't let her stress about money. So I learned my lesson. By 15, I had joined every club and academic competition I could find, not just for good grades, but for perfect ones. I stayed up late studying, wrote scholarship essays until my hands cramped, and did everything I could to make sure I wouldn't have to depend on them for college. It paid off. I got a full scholarship to State University. I still remember the look of relief on their faces when I told them they wouldn't have to spend a dime on my education. And yet, even after I put myself through college, even after I landed a good job, here I was, clearing their plates while they hung on to Sarah's every word. I had worked so hard to stand on my own, but standing here in my parents' house, I felt like I had never mattered at all. It started small. "Anna, you'll watch Emma and Lucas while we go shopping, right?" Sarah would say, her tone light, like it wasn't really a question. "Mike and I hardly get any alone time these days." The first time, I hesitated. "Can't Mom and Dad watch them?" "Oh, honey," Mom said, rubbing her lower back with an exaggerated sigh. "You know it's hard for me to keep up with young children. And I need my rest on weekends," Dad added, shaking his head like it was the most obvious thing in the world. So, there I was, spending yet another Saturday night watching Frozen for what felt like the 100th time while Emma twirled around in her Elsa dress and Lucas tried to color on my bedroom walls. Sarah and Mike, meanwhile, were out having a quiet, peaceful dinner with friends. At first, I told myself it was just one weekend. No big deal. Just helping out. But then it happened again. And again. Every month, Sarah and Mike would show up, barely setting their bags down before making plans to go out. "Oh, we won't be gone long," Sarah would promise, already grabbing her purse. "Just a couple of hours." Those couple of hours would stretch into entire evenings. By the time they stumbled back home, I'd be slumped on the couch, exhausted, with Emma asleep against my shoulder and Lucas drooling onto my sweater. Sarah would beam at me. "Thanks, Anna. You're the best." Mom and Dad never said anything. Never acknowledged it. It was just expected. An unspoken rule. Sarah and Mike got their fun weekends. Mom and Dad got to dote on their grandkids without any of the work. And me? I got stuck in the same cycle. Over and over again. I was washing dishes after dinner when I heard Mom's phone ring from the living room. Her voice was calm at first, then suddenly urgent. "Oh, sweetheart, don't cry. Tell me what happened." I turned off the faucet, listening. Through the speaker, I could hear Sarah's muffled sobs. "Mike's company shut down without warning," she choked out. "We can't afford our rent anymore. We have nothing saved. Can we maybe stay with you for a while?" "Of course you can," Mom exclaimed immediately. "We'll make room. Don't even worry about it." My stomach dropped. I stepped into the living room, clearing my throat. If they're moving in, maybe this is a good time for me to get my own place. You'd think I had suggested burning the house down. Mom turned to me, eyes wide with disbelief. "Anna, don't be ridiculous. There's plenty of room for everyone." "But," Dad chimed in, his voice firm, "we're family. We stick together during hard times." That was the end of the discussion. By the following weekend, Sarah and Mike arrived with 3 cars full of belongings. The house was instantly chaotic, overflowing with moving boxes and noisy children. And me? I was shoved into the smallest room in the house. My old bedroom, the one I had lived in my entire life, became a nursery because, as Mom put it, the kids need space to play. So, I dragged my things into the cramped storage room, barely big enough for a twin bed and a dresser, and tried to breathe through the growing frustration in my chest. Emma and Lucas took over the house like it was their personal playground. They ran up and down the hallways, screaming, throwing toys everywhere, while Sarah lounged on the couch scrolling through her phone. "Emma, Lucas, keep it down," I snapped one afternoon when they burst into my tiny room, knocking my work files onto the floor. "They're just playing, Anna," Sarah called from the living room without even glancing up. "Don't be such a grouch." Meanwhile, Mike was supposedly job hunting. But all I ever saw him do was sit at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, sighing dramatically every time someone asked about his progress. "The job market's tough right now," he'd say. but I'm sure something will come up soon. I lay awake in my cramped little bed each night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the chaos that had taken over my home. How had I let myself get trapped like this? The first utility bill after Sarah's family moved in nearly made me choke. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the numbers on the screen, almost double what I usually paid. The water bill alone had skyrocketed, not to mention the electricity and heating. I checked my bank account. My savings, what little I had managed to set aside, were disappearing fast. That night at dinner, I decided to say something. So, about the utility bills, I started pushing my food around my plate. They've doubled since last month. I can't keep covering everything by myself anymore. It's taking almost my entire salary. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. Are you seriously complaining about money right now? When Mike and I have lost everything. I exhaled slowly. I'm not complaining. I just think we need to figure out a fair way to. I can't believe how selfish you're being. Sarah's voice rose as she shook her head in disbelief. We're going through the hardest time of our lives, and all you care about is money? Mom immediately jumped in. Sarah's right, Anna. Her tone was sharp. Family helps family. That's what we do. Dad nodded solemnly. This isn't the time to be counting pennies. I looked down at my plate, swallowing the words I really wanted to say. Fine. Never mind. I chewed my food in silence as my family moved on, talking about Sarah's latest parenting struggles while I sat there, invisible. That night, as I lay in my tiny storage room turned bedroom, the truth settled in my chest like a stone. I wasn't just helping. I was being used. Mike finally got a job. It wasn't as high-paying as his previous one, but at least it was something. I thought maybe things would start getting better. Maybe Sarah would finally start pulling her weight. I was wrong. Within days, she was complaining. It's so hard being alone with the kids all day, she sighed one morning, sprawled out on the couch while Lucas climbed onto my lap with sticky hands. Mike leaves at 8 and doesn't get home until 6. I never get a break. And just like that, the babysitting request started again. Anna, can you watch the kids while I run to the store? Anna, I just need a quick nap. Could you keep an eye on them? Anna, you're home. Can you handle bedtime? I'm exhausted. At first, it was small favors. Then, before I knew it, Sarah had made watching her children my full-time, unpaid job. Every day after work, I'd walk through the front door only to find Sarah already dressed and waiting. Oh, good, you're home, she'd say cheerfully, grabbing her purse. Mike and I are meeting some friends for dinner. Emma and Lucas have already had their snack, but they'll need dinner in an hour. Thanks, sis. And just like that, they'd be gone. Weekends were even worse. On Friday nights, Sarah would casually drop her schedule into conversation. Oh, Mike and I desperately need a date night, she'd say. And then tomorrow, we're doing brunch with some friends. Oh. And there's that new movie we have to see. And just like that, my weekends were decided for me. Whenever I tried to push back, my parents shut me down. Anna, she's your sister, Mom would say with a sigh. She needs your help. Dad would nod, adding, besides, this is good practice for when you have kids someday. Think of it as training. One Sunday night, after an exhausting weekend of babysitting, I finally hit my breaking point. I was in my tiny, cluttered room, trying to breathe through my frustration. My head throbbed from hours of listening to Baby Shark on repeat. My shirt was stained with applesauce from Lucas's tantrum at dinner. My legs ached from chasing Emma around the house. And Sarah? Sarah was out enjoying a movie date with Mike. Something inside me snapped. I could not live like this anymore. I had spent my whole life being the responsible one, the selfless one, the one who never complained. But this wasn't helping. This was being used. And I was done. For the first time in months, I had something to look forward to. Rachel, a friend from work, had invited me on a ski trip with a few coworkers. A whole weekend away, fresh air, snow, laughter, freedom. The moment she mentioned it, I said yes. I barely thought twice. That Friday evening, I was in my tiny room, packing my duffel bag, actually feeling excited for once. I had just folded my warmest sweater when Sarah appeared in my doorway, arms crossed. What are you doing? She asked, her eyes narrowing as she took in the half-packed bag on my bed. Packing, I said, rolling up my thermal socks. I'm going to Pine Ridge with some friends for the weekend. Sarah's face darkened. You need to cancel. I looked up, confused. Excuse me? Mike and I are going to Aunt Linda's 60th birthday party tomorrow, she said matter-of-factly. Mom and Dad are coming too. You need to stay home with Emma and Lucas. I blinked at her. Then I actually laughed. A real, genuine laugh at the sheer audacity of it. You're joking, right? I said, shaking my head. You can't seriously expect me to cancel my plans because you didn't bother to tell me about yours. Sarah's face turned red. This isn't funny, Anna. You're being completely unreasonable. No, I said, my voice steady. What's unreasonable is assuming I'll drop everything at a moment's notice to be your personal babysitter again. Sarah sputtered for a moment, then turned on her heel and stormed down the hallway.
Mom, Dad.
Mike, she shouted. You won't believe what Anna is doing. Within seconds, my tiny room was flooded with people. Mom looked at me like I had personally betrayed her. What's this about you going skiing? I zipped up my bag. Exactly what it sounds like. But you can't, Sarah snapped. We have Aunt Linda's party. No, I corrected. You have Aunt Linda's party. I turned to my parents. Why am I just now hearing about this? Why wasn't I included in any of the planning? Mom hesitated, looking guilty for half a second. Sarah jumped in before she could answer. We all discussed it and decided this would work best for everyone. Everyone, I repeated, feeling the heat rise in my chest. Everyone except me. Well, you can't bring small children to a sophisticated party, Sarah said as if I was being ridiculous. I grabbed my duffel bag and slung it over my shoulder. Sounds like a you problem. Sarah's jaw dropped. What's that supposed to mean? It means exactly what it sounds like, I said, stepping past her. I have plans. I'm going skiing. Your children are your responsibility. Mike finally spoke up, frowning. That's not fair. Fair. I scoffed. You expect me to give up my weekend for you, but suddenly fairness matters? Mom's voice turned sharp. If you walk out that door tomorrow, don't bother coming back. The room fell silent. And then, to everyone's surprise, I laughed. I laughed. For the first time in months, I laughed, a deep, genuine, freeing kind of laugh. They all stared at me, like I had lost my mind. You know what's funny? I said, wiping a tear from my eye. I've been dreaming about moving out for months. I just didn't have the courage to do it. But here you are, giving me the perfect excuse. Sarah's face twisted in rage. Get out then, she shrieked. Just go. Gladly. I pulled out my phone and dialed Rachel's number, putting it on speaker just for the dramatic effect. Hey, Rach, I said, my voice light. That offer to crash at your place still good? Of course. You want to come over now? She asked, oblivious to the scene unfolding in my childhood home. That would be perfect. I ended the call and turned back to my stunned family. I'll be gone in 20 minutes. They didn't believe me at first. Mom stood frozen in place, Dad shifted uncomfortably, and Sarah just kept shaking her head like she could will me into submission. But the moment I started grabbing things, clothes, shoes, important documents, they realized I was serious. I made trip after trip down the stairs, carrying boxes and bags to my car while they watched, too stunned to stop me. On my final trip, I stepped into the living room, looking at the family who had always expected me to sacrifice everything for them. Oh, one more thing, I said, my voice casual. Since I won't be living here anymore, I won't be paying any of the bills either. You'll have to figure out how to support yourselves. Mom went pale. But the utilities, the groceries.
Not my
problem. Sarah exploded. Are you kidding me? You're just going to abandon us? Leave us to struggle while you go off and have your little ski trip? I smiled, stepping toward the front door. You figured out how to use me just fine. I'm sure you'll figure this out too. And with that, I walked out, Sarah's screams ringing behind me, slamming the door shut on a life I never wanted to go back to. Rachel's spare room wasn't big, but the moment I set my bags down, I felt lighter than I had in years. No screaming kids. No passive-aggressive sighs. No guilt weighing me down. Just silence. The next morning, Rachel and I drove to Pine Ridge for the ski trip. For the first time in forever, I laughed without hesitation. I drank hot chocolate by the fire, raced down the slopes, and stayed up late talking with people who actually cared about me. When we got back Sunday night, I opened my laptop and started searching for apartments. With my salary no longer being funneled into supporting my entire family, I realized I could actually afford a decent place. By Wednesday, I had signed a lease on a small but bright one-bedroom apartment just 15 minutes from work. It was mine. No storage room turned bedroom. No responsibilities that weren't mine to carry. Just my space, my rules, my life. My phone, however, wouldn't stop buzzing. Mom's texts were relentless. How could you do this to us? We need you. Sarah's were more direct. You're the most selfish person I have ever met. Dad kept it short. Your mother is very upset. Fix this. I read them all. Then I blocked every single one of them. It felt like cutting the last anchor, holding me down. Maybe one day, I'd be ready to have my family back in my life. Maybe we could build something healthier, something based on respect and boundaries. Or maybe we wouldn't. Either way, for the first time in my life, I chose myself. And I wasn't looking back.